Starting. Oh, okay. It's like the most intense thing because it's just like starting ... Hi, everyone. This is episode 2 of the Port Haven StreamCast, coming to you from 2 different parts of the United States of America. Oh my gosh, I can hear myself in my own ears. Hold on. Oh, that was fun. Okay. So yeah, today we have a whole lot to talk about. I am one of your 2 hosts, YodaBauer, and I'm here with
your boy, Professor Jango.
Hi, and we're here. First, we're going to talk to you about the new Star Wars film announcements, which we're really excited to talk about. And once we get that out of the way, we're going to get down into talking about what we know about the Han Solo movie. It's been a really exciting, really action-packed week for Star Wars. So to get into our first topic, Jango, I'm going to let you kind of let everyone know what happened.
Sure. Well, while we were going about our business yesterday, just doing regular Wednesday things, or was it Tuesday? Anyway, whatever day
Tuesday,
it was,
yeah.
It was Tuesday. I was editing a video, and I know Jess was working on some stuff for the Solo trailer, and I'm just sitting there on my computer, get a notification on my phone that says new films announced, and I'm like, wait, what? And so I pull up this video on Star Wars' YouTube channel, and wouldn't you know it, they announced even more upcoming Star Wars films. So we already had an announcement that we've covered at length a while back that Rian Johnson was going to be making a trilogy of films, but this is even completely separate from that. We got a message, and there's a press release on StarWars.com that you can find there if you don't want to watch the video, that the people behind the television series on HBO, Game of Thrones, will be getting their own series of Star Wars films that will be separate both from what they're calling the episodic Skywalker saga, episodes 1 through 9, and the trilogy that's going to be produced and developed by Rian Johnson. So this is a completely separate thing that we have here. We don't really know anything about it except that they're excited for it. They also said that that they knew that production on their films couldn't start at least until they were done with the last season of Game of Thrones, and that season doesn't air until next year. So production of that will probably run through sometime next year, 2019, and then the production on these Star Wars films would start presumably sometime after that. So still looking at the very earliest at like a 2020, maybe 2021 timetable for these films. And we have absolutely no information about it. We do know, you might have seen in our video about this on our YouTube channel that, of course, Emilia Clarke, who stars in Game of Thrones, is already in the Solo film. So there are some connections there. But as far as what these films might be about, where they might be set, or anything else, your guess is as good as ours. So we don't really have a whole lot of information about that, but just wanted to make sure while we're here on the streamcast that we at least acknowledged that it was happening, because it kind of caught us all by surprise.
Yeah, and of course, Gwendolyn Christie is Captain Phasma. So
of course, yeah,
we have a couple of Game of Throners in the series so far. But yeah, I was certainly shocked. I thought, like with the Rian Johnson trilogy, we were good. Of course, there's a lot of talk about a Kenobi movie, which I would like to clarify, unless I'm mistaken on this, it actually hasn't been greenlit. Like, there's been no Kenobi movie announced on StarWars.com. It's just something they're in the process of developing and couldn't hide from anybody. So that one isn't actually ready to go. It's just like about 2-3 years back, there's a lot of talk about a Boba Fett film that was in the same kind of production limbo, and that one kind of tapered off. So we'll see. But yeah, there's just going to be a lot of Star Wars. Obviously, since they won't even start developing it until Game of Thrones is done, which doesn't even air until next year.
Yep.
It's going to be a while. I don't think we're going to hit Marvel level of like 3 movies a year. I think they're just trying to set themselves up to have a film a year. Which some people might think is too many. I'm actually pretty okay with a Star Wars film a year. I'm not much of a Game of Thrones person, and that's not a reflection on the series. I just haven't even tried. So I
Right.
might like it if I tried. But I'm just excited to see the idea of more films coming out.
I mean, and I don't think that necessarily because we know that these people have been signed on that this means we're going to get Star Wars Game of Thrones either. Like people can make different films. Um
Right.
I mean, even with Ron Howard, like I think Solo is going to be different than other Ron Howard movies. I mean, and if you think about The Last Jedi, Ryan Johnson got famous by making a movie about a high schooler that steals a brick of cocaine, and that was nothing like The Last Jedi. So like, just because people make movies don't mean they make the same movies.
Right.
But I'm excited about it, and you know, and thinking about the timing too. You know, the way I used to think about it is, you know, we used to have, you know, during the prequels like 3 years in between a film, and now like my brain can't wrap itself around the fact that we're going to have like a year and a half
Right.
between
Yeah.
Solo and Episode 9. And so like it certainly doesn't bother me, the idea that we might get a film a year, because that year and a half, we're not even in that year and a half yet, and it already makes me have Star Wars withdrawals.
I think a lot of that is coming from, since I think it was 2008 that the Clone Wars came out.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I love the Clone Wars and I love Rebels just as much as I love the films. So
Right.
I'm also used to like half-hour long Star Wars movies once a week, to get me through between Star Wars movies. So I'm already used to just like all this material. And I think what makes this even more daunting is not only do we have a year and a half between Solo and Episode 9, there's no more Rebels, and they haven't announced another TV series to go in the fall of 18.
Right.
So what am I going to watch for a year and a half is like what I'm asking myself.
Just gonna pop in those Clone Wars DVDs that I know you have.
Oh, yeah.
Probably right behind you somewhere.
I do have them right behind me. But yeah, I'm kind of in the, as long as there's no obvious decrease in quality, I'm not really bothered by more films. If it got so bad that like every film was kind of objectively terrible, if there is such a thing as objectively terrible in a film, then I'd be upset. But like I've talked about it before, I have a lot of technical problems with Rogue One. Like I love characters in Rogue One, I love the story of Rogue One, I love what Rogue One represents. But every time I watch it, I just sit there anxiously because I would completely re-edit the film and like change a whole bunch of things. And I've just kind of come to terms with that. But I can objectively look at the film and go, no, it's still a good movie. There's just pet peeves I have. It just wasn't a movie made for YodaBauer. And that's okay. Not every movie needs to be made for me. And I think as long as, you know, if there's an occasional Star Wars movie that's like that, where it's just not my favorite, but it wasn't bad, I can handle it. But if it gets to the point where like everything is the holiday special, then I'm going to be unhappy, if that makes sense.
I mean, and it's also worth pointing out, one, again, we don't know anything about any of these films apart from Solo, obviously, in May, and then Episode 9. You know, we don't really know much about it, but we know it's coming, and we know kind of what it has to talk about. But like these other films, not only do we not know their content, like the fact that we are assuming that it's going to be a video a year is still just an assumption. Like, yeah. We have no timetable for these films, and so just because, you know, since The Force Awakens and then Rogue One, you know, we've had a film a year, doesn't mean that that's what we're going to continue. Like these films could take longer to produce. You know, Ryan Johnson says he still doesn't really have a firm idea of what he even wants to do. And so, you know, we could still have 2-3 years in between Episode 9 and whatever comes next, or these films could still be 2 years apart. So we're making a lot of assumptions here.
And that's true. And I think that brings up, if I have any concern about this, it isn't the idea of how many films, but it feels like they hired these guys on the basis of, we'd like to work with them, so we hired them, and then they get to develop their story, which is such a weird concept, because in any other scenario, they would have had to have their movie written and pitch it to Kathleen Kennedy, she basically took over for George Lucas at Lucasfilm. And I mean, they with Rian Johnson's movies, that doesn't really bother me because they worked with him on The Last Jedi. They liked their relationship with him and they wanted to keep it. And so, like, he made a good movie for Star Wars, and so they wanted to hang on to him. These guys have not worked in Star Wars, and I guess I'm just on the topic of Solo. I'm kind of afraid of the Lord and Miller effect, which was here's two guys who are really cool and happening, and we want to work with them, and then they get fired off of the movie, basically. And then you have to bring in Ron Howard, who, while new to Star Wars, is not new to Lucasfilm, like, at all. Right. He was an incredibly safe and smart choice to kind of come in and course correct Solo.
Well, if 3 years down the road they get fired and Steven Spielberg gets hired, I won't complain too much.
I wouldn't complain about that either. I think now that Abrams has done a Star Wars film and is about to do 2, the only other director where I'm like, I need this Star Wars movie would probably be Spielberg, but I don't think he'd want to do it out of respect to Lucas.
No,
but who knows?
Still got my fingers crossed for Tarantino or Joss Whedon.
That would be pretty crazy too.
Or Tarantino and Joss Whedon
together co-directing. Well, I would have said Whedon would be pretty likely, except for now he's jumped from Disney to Warner Brothers with getting involved with Justice League, so they might not have him on lockdown. Although he still, no, he didn't do Infinity War. The Russo brothers did. So the guys behind the Captain America, Winter Soldier, and Civil War. So yeah,
I'd also take a Coen Brothers Star Wars movie.
I would totally take a Coen Brothers Star Wars movie. No
especially
joke.
if it involved Oscar Isaacs with a beard playing guitar.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a different type of topic.
Oh man, but yeah, like that's kind of all I really have to say. Oh, we have a suggestion for Christopher Nolan. Would be interesting. That would be interesting. The doors are really open now. To kind of get in the nitty gritty, part of the problem the Star Wars movies had before was, so when A New Hope was released in 1977, when it was just Star Wars, and it had that crawl technically broke Union Guild rules. Like, you had to have opening credits back in the day. And then no one cared for the first Star Wars film because everyone thought the movie was going to bomb. They didn't want to sue a movie that no one thought was going to do anything anyway. So when Lucas went ahead and released The Empire Strikes Back and still had the crawl and didn't have opening credits, he got fined up the wazoo for not having it. So he dropped out of definitely the Directors Guild. It was either the Writer or the Producers Guild. I can't remember. But he dropped out of another one. And he was an independent filmmaker. And in fact, he wanted Spielberg to direct Return of the Jedi, but Spielberg couldn't because Spielberg was still in the Directors Guild. So that was kind of this weird thing. So then with the prequels, Lucas wanted to direct himself anyway, but he would have been limited, I think, by the same problem. But now that they're basically making the films again within the unions, they can have just about anybody they want direct it. So this guy's kind of the limit. And I think we should point out the producers from Game of Thrones are hired to write and produce. They have not been confirmed as directors. They still might be, but they haven't been confirmed as directors yet. So we could see somebody else directing those.
I mean, and it's very possible too. This is something that hasn't been talked about a lot either, but maybe would make people more on board for it. Is, you know, these guys have made a name for themselves adapting an already existing property, like the Song of Ice and Fire books. Like, they're writing the series, and the series has made some diversions from those books. Obviously, if you've read the books and watched the series, you know what some of those differences are. But like, what if they've been hired to specifically adapt something? You know, so it could be, you know, maybe for all you Legends canon people, or you know, take ideas at least that we've already seen in other places and not write a new film, but come up with some type of adaptation that can work in a different universe, because that's exactly what they did with the Song of Ice and Fire books. They said, we're going to adapt these things, but where it's necessary to make it its own universe here, because not everything works on television that works in a book, we're going to make changes. And, you know, they could do that same sort of thing with Star Wars.
And I think that's a great point that I hadn't thought of. And that the kind of, I'm almost reticent to say it because I don't like the idea, but the internet, anytime there's a new Star Wars movie or TV show announced, it's always, will it be Knights of the Old Republic? And if they're hired to adapt something, that would probably be the most fan wanted thing, which would be a possibility, especially because it's still an ongoing property with Lucasfilm, even though it's not canon. It's the only Legends canon that is still getting new content.
Right.
All right. I think, yeah, that's all I really had to say. So if you want, we can, if you guys want to think of any questions at the end of the streamcast, we'll address what you guys have to say. But until then, we could probably move on to talking about the Solo trailer and TV spot.
Yep, that sounds good to me. I will also say, just before we get into this, that we already have a couple of videos out on this. So if you've not watched those, you definitely should. So we had YodaBauer did a reaction video to the teaser that we got during the Super Bowl. Then we both did a reaction video together for the full trailer that we got Monday morning. And Jess has done a complete breakdown since then that goes frame by frame through some of these trailer stuff. So if you've not caught up with that, make sure you do, because there's a lot of good content in there as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to try not to tread over too much of what I said in the video, just because I don't want to bore anybody who might try to sit through both of these things. But there's so much in the trailer that I'm excited about. And I think what I'm most excited about kind of ties into what we were just talking about, which is this, even more so than Rogue One, feels like it's trying to tap into Legends material. So, following along on Twitter, I noticed a couple of people were really surprised in the trailer when it says that Han was in the Imperial Academy. And I even saw an article that's like, the big plot twist in the Solo trailer. And I read it like there was no plot twist in the Solo trailer, and I realized this is what they're talking about. That's from Legends. Like, in fact, it might be so far as to have been in a guide for A New Hope. Like that is information I've just always known, that Han Solo was in the Imperial Academy for a while. I'm not 100% for sure on it, but I'm pretty sure him leaving the Empire had a lot to do with him rescuing Chewbacca, which is why Chewbacca has what's called a life debt to Han, which means he will be with him forever because he feels like he owes him because he pulled Chewbacca out of slavery. The Empire was using Wookiees to help construct the Death Star. So that's point one. A lot of people are speculating the giant storm you see in the trailer is this thing called the Maw. And the Maw in Legends was a series of black holes around Kessel, which is where you get the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. It's a planet that was covered in, or really an asteroid that's fused with spice, which is Star Wars drugs. And so a lot of us are thinking that could be the Maw because Kessel is definitely involved in the film. Ron Howard teased it on Twitter a couple months. So that could be a thing. And there's all sorts of little shout outs, like the dice from The Last Jedi, which were actually an Easter egg. Well, not an Easter egg, but a hidden thing in A New Hope, are in this film. And I really think that this is going to pull in old lore. So like where Rogue One was a nostalgia trip, it didn't really keep to any preconceived notions we had about where the Death Star plans came from. That was all Kyle Katarn and a bunch of other stories that it completely overwrote, but it had this nostalgic feel for the original trilogy. Solo, I think, is really going to pull in, even with Tag and Bink, which we have a video on Tag and Bink and who they are and what they're doing in the Solo movie also.
Right.
It's one of the first ones we made on the channel, actually. And yeah, that's what I'm just excited about, is I think this will finally be the movie that's going to reestablish a lot of old canon material and pull it back into canon.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think a lot of people forget to go back to the Imperial Academy point, that the Empire at the time was basically the only game in town. So, like, if you wanted to go to flight school to learn how to be a pilot, like, there are any number of rebel pilots that learned piloting in the Imperial Academy for whatever amount of time. I mean, Luke, even in A New Hope, Luke wants to go to the Imperial Academy, even as much as he's like interested in the war against the Empire. And Owen says he doesn't want to be in politics, but that's just where you go. Like, if Luke Skywalker has aspirations to go to the Imperial Academy, it shouldn't be a surprise that Han Solo did, for whatever amount of time he was actually there. I will also say that one of the things, just from the trailers, and of course trailers can be different, that excites me is the soundtrack. I love the music playing over the trailers. It almost has kind of a Tron kind of feel to it, but not quite. And I feel like, just from the visuals of it, just from the music of it, that Ron Howard, and the other people that are involved in the production have really kind of found a tone that just gets me excited about this film, even on top of whatever might be in the plot. Just the feel of this movie feels fun and feels right to me. And Rogue One had a different type of feel, and it was all about like this feel of urgency, and almost desperation from both Jyn and from the rebellion. But this just feels so different, and it feels so lighthearted is not really the right word for it, but just upbeat, literally and metaphorically, if we're talking about music.
No, I love the music too. I had the same first reaction, and I've seen a couple different people notice the same thing. The opening of the trailer is sound effects of switches flipping on what I'm assuming is the Falcon,
Right.
but they also feel like beats in the music. So it was this real kind of fusion of familiar sounding Star Wars themes and a new kind of instrumentation with sound effects, and it was this really cool way to just kind of pull you into it. What I think is interesting is both in the kind of music it has, but also in its look and kind of the hokiness of it, like the space octopus. I've been freaking out about the giant space octopus. It feels, a lot of people are saying this too, it feels a little bit Blade Runner-y. It feels a little bit original Total Recall-y. What I think is kind of meta about this is, when I think of the original Blade Runner, or I think of the original Total Recall, my brain automatically goes back a couple of decades, and I feel like I'm back a couple of decades. So in this the way this movie like adopts that kind of iconography, it makes it feel older, even though it's going to be released this year. So I already feel like I'm going back in time to when Han Solo is younger, because it's feeling like a movie that would have been made back then. Maybe that's just me, and maybe I'm just crazy, but I almost feel like that's kind of an intentional element to make it feel older, so that it has more continuity with Han Solo, where Rogue One had that continuity in terms of locations and how ships looked, but it looked like the movies being made now. It didn't even really look like the prequel trilogy. It feels like they're really trying to make this film feel updated and modern, but also like it fits with A New Hope.
Right. And I think other examples of this same type of thing, not to necessarily compare it to these films, because I know one of these films you care a lot about, but Super 8 had the same type of effect, or even Stranger Things, which I think Stranger Things relies on kind of the nostalgia of that kind of moment, and it plays on a lot of people's feelings there. But it really does like take you into that moment. Even like American Graffiti does sort of that same type of thing, where it makes you feel, again, the tone of the time that it's trying to portray, even without kind of being retro in the technology that it's using. So like, we can have a modern Solo film that fits with like 70s, late 70s, early 80s sci-fi. It just feels that way to me. And that's why I say that it feels like Blade Runner to me. And I've discussed this with some people online who well, Blade Runner's, all about like society on Earth, and there's no aliens, and it's not that futuristic, and it's all grungy, and this may not be that, but it just has that kind of feel to me, because it feels like a throwback film in a way, and I think that's a way, again, to aim at a certain type of Star Wars fan that may not be completely obsessed with the sequel trilogy, which is exactly what Rogue One did. Rogue One said, a lot of people want this type of throwback to the rebellion. They want to see people in X-wings, and they want to see, these stories perhaps that don't have anything to do with lightsabers and Luke Skywalker and Han and Leia's kids or whatever. And so Rogue One kind of met that niche for some people, and I think this will do the same thing for other people.
And I completely agree. And I think what's really interesting is you brought up American Graffiti, which, now that you say that, I might have to put on my homework to watch before I go see Solo. If you are unfamiliar with American Graffiti, it was George Lucas's second feature film, the film he made just before A New Hope. So he made THX 1138, which is where THX the comes from, that company is named for his first feature film. Then he made American Graffiti on a dare from Francis Ford Coppola, and then he made Star Wars. So American Graffiti is a movie directed by George Lucas, starring Ron Howard, that co-stars Harrison Ford. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least if there isn't a lot of shout-outs to that movie. And I don't think it would be entirely unrelated thematically. So American Graffiti, it's been a long time since I watched it, but as far as I can remember, it's Ron Howard, who's the kid who's not ready to grow up and move out into the world, who's trying to enjoy his last few days of being young, with a buddy who's all sorts of ready to go out and get into the world. And they get into a whole bunch of shenanigans. And I could kind of see Solo, being more about not Ron Howard's character, but about the guy who just wants to go out into the world and have fun.
Right. But I mean, and visually, I thought it was a throwback to American Graffiti. That moment, it's pretty early on in the full teaser trailer, where I think in our reaction to it, I said it made me feel like the Fast and the Furious, but really it made me feel like American Graffiti, because there's a really famous shot from American Graffiti where they're being chased by a police car, and they're sliding around a corner, and then the police car's axle gets pulled out. But anyway, you have to watch that film to understand it. But that shot with the speeders sort of sliding around that corner feels, in my mind, and again, it's been a couple of years since I've seen American Graffiti, but it feels kind of exactly like that to me. And I can see Ron Howard wanting to pay tribute to George Lucas in that way, to say, this was a film, that was, because Ron Howard from Happy Days, like American Graffiti is kind of up his alley anyway, in terms of like the characters he portrayed as an actor. And I can see him wanting to sort of return that favor to George Lucas, to say, well, now I'm playing in your sandbox, let me do something that's a tribute to you also.
Yeah, absolutely. And even more than that, I can't take credit for this because I don't know cars, so I wouldn't have picked up on it at all. But there's on Twitter, I've seen several tweets of the speeder that you see with Han at the beginning of the trailer is modeled after an old car that's actually called the Falcon.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I thought that was neat. So like they noticed it with the tail lights and that sort of thing. So that kind of makes me think of American Graffiti too, because it's all about old cars basically, and people's relationships with their cars. And the Millennium Falcon is just like one giant weird car.
And in the world of coincidences, I don't know if you follow actual space news, but Elon Musk and his company SpaceX just launched a rocket the other day that's supposed to be like a test for a future Mars mission, and it was called Falcon Heavy, and the payload of that was one of his own cars. So Falcons and space and cars, it's all connected.
All connected. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of nostalgia. I know a lot of people don't want a film that's all about nostalgia, but I made this point in my trailer breakdown too. There is no point to a Han Solo film except nostalgia. Yeah. Like, unless there's some sort of plot twist I'm unaware of that's going to happen in the movie, Han Solo, in the grand scheme of things, is not important until A New Hope. And I kind of want this film to stay that way. I want this film to just be a fun trip into his past. And it would be especially great if they decided to make it a nostalgia trip for Legends as well, especially early Legends. Like there's 2 different Han Solo trilogies, and there's a Lando Calrissian trilogy. Which, where's my Lando book? If I can find my Lando book, it's like the best cover. I'll look for it the next time Jango talks. But it's like, I mean, it's like really corny, hokey stuff. And I don't know. I'm excited for something that could explore that. But if you are hoping that there is more to this than a nostalgia trip, you might be setting yourself up to be disappointed, because that's the purpose of this movie, I think.
I mean, and I think the thing that gets me about nostalgia is that I'm one of the first people to complain about nostalgia, because I feel like it's manipulative in a lot of ways. But at the same time, if I'm watching a film or a series that's based on nostalgia, like that's the motivation for it, I complain about it until the lights go down and the film starts to play. And then I'm like, oh my God, look, it's the thing. It's the thing. And it's the person that I liked, and they're doing the thing that they used to do in that other thing with the other people. And like, that's how this movie makes me feel. Like, as much as I might want to complain about that, you know, when I see Han Solo with Chewbacca, you know, and like, we didn't get to see this in the trailer so much, but like one of those promotional images of Lando that's like got him in the yellow shirt with the cape and everything. I'm like, hey, that's Lando, and that's Lando. It looks like he did in the thing that he did before in the other thing. And like, I can really get into that moment, as much as I want to complain about it. As soon as I see it, you know, it's all different to me. And I feel like that's how a lot of people are, whether they want to admit it or not, is they might complain about nostalgia, but they still like the way that nostalgia makes them feel once they're in the moment.
Yeah. And to that point, I found my book cover while you were talking. So this is the book cover for Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Shrew, which this is one of the many reasons why I tell people that it's okay that Legends material is Legends. Now, I never finished this book. I tried, but after like 20 pages of Sabacc, I couldn't keep. Oh, 25. I found my bookmark. I got to page 24 or 25. This was years ago. But yeah, Lando Calrissian and the Mind Harp of Shrew. Like, this is kind of what I'm hoping we reference while also making it better. I do need to read this sometime so I can figure out what the Mind Harp of Shrew actually is.
Well, and I think it's worth pointing out, I see that you've been chatting with our pal Bare Naked Gaming in the chat. But there is a Lando comic that is canon. There's a Han Solo comic that is canon, and I can't imagine both of those not being important somehow to this. We also we got a story about Lando in the From a Certain Point of View book that I liked, where he kind of sees the Falcon being involved, and like other things too. Like, so from the Han Solo comic, we know that Han Solo was a racer at one point, and we see that again. Is it Aftermath or Bloodline, where Han leaves to go do a race?
Bloodline, I think, because that's why he's not there for the events of Bloodline.
Right. Yep. I don't think that's a huge spoiler if you've not read Bloodline, but I think it ties into not just the potential for Legend stuff, which I liked the Han Solo trilogy, the first one, and
I have them. I've just never read them. I might try to burn through them before the movie. Yeah,
but they're pretty good. But I like the new canon stuff that we've seen too. And again, both of those comics, the Hondo comic, not the Hondo, although I would love a Hondo comic.
I would
the
love
Han comic and the Lando comic are both really good, and I recommend them pretty highly.
Let me see here. There's 2 Han Solo trilogies. There's one by A.C. Crispin. I actually have, I think, book 1 and 3, which is why I never. Oh no, I have 1 and 2. I don't own 3, but one of these days will read it. And then isn't the other one by Brian Daly?
Oh, that sounds familiar to me. Yeah.
Yeah, but there were 2 different. But there was a lot about Han early on, just because he was safe to talk about, because Han Solo before A New Hope doesn't matter. So it was a thing that Lucas could let people write about. Without
and there's
no, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say there's another Legends book about Han and Lando that kind of makes me feel some vibes from this too, and that's what is it? It's here behind me.
We keep going for
Scoundrels.
Scoundrels. Yeah.
It took a minute for me to remember the name, but Scoundrels was a really fun heist story starring Han and Chewie and Lando and some other people. And this, I don't think it's going to be an adaptation of this in any way, but it makes me feel the same sort of things. It makes me feel, again, this connection to the Legends canon, to this stuff that is a throwback, to this stuff that people would have liked. And Scoundrels is not that old of a book. It was probably not too long before the Disney buyout.
It was one of the last ones. A Zahn book, no less. I think he wrote it. So there was Allegiance and Choices of One, which was his last two books with Mara, and then he wrote Scoundrels, I think.
Yeah, and like that was a fun little story too. You know, it's basically Ocean's 11, but Han Solo, and I wouldn't mind seeing some kind of version of this on screen. Also, too, Nolan, you would definitely like Scoundrels. It's a fun book.
Yeah. I think it's up your alley, actually, quite a bit. What I liked about Scoundrels actually is in it, Han and Lando have a kind of a rivalry, and it's fallout from Han getting the Falcon, right? Am I remembering that correctly? It's been a while since I've read it.
As far as I remember, yeah.
And that's something I'm hoping we get to see in Solo. It has to stay that Lando used to have the Falcon and then Han got it from Lando, because that's dialogue from Return of the Jedi. So that's not going to change. One of the recently released Entertainment Weekly images has Lando sitting at a table with cards in his hand. And in either the trailer or the TV spot, I can't remember which one, you kind of see Han walking into the same area. And so I think we're going to see the card game where Han wins the Falcon from Lando, which Lando previously, the line is that Han says to Lando, "You lost her to me fair and square." So we knew that it used to be Lando's, but I think the idea that it was a card game is specifically Legends as opposed to something else, but I don't know. But that's something I'm excited to see play out.
Yeah. I don't remember if it was a card game specifically in Legends, but I would also, I would love to see what card game it is, because as much as we've seen Sabacc in plenty of Legends material and in different video games, I don't know that we've actually seen that on screen before. Or if you've read, was this Lando's story in From a Certain Point of View, where it's like the card game that he's playing, where like you bet everything all at once.
Oh yeah.
And then it's like you're calling the person's bluff or something.
That sounds familiar. Where is my From a Certain Point of View over here?
I would love to see that potentially as well.
I know that John Jackson Miller, who wrote one of the stories in the Canto Bight book, which I haven't finished yet. I haven't gotten to John Jackson Miller's yet. He came up with a new game also. So I wonder if they won't use his. Like maybe he got to come up with a card game for this purpose, even though it was a book that ties into Last Jedi.
Right.
Alternatively, there's always Pazak from Knights of the Old Republic, which is space blackjack. Sure. But yeah, I'll be curious to know if it's Sabacc or not, because I don't think we've seen it on screen.
Yeah, I spent way too much time playing Knights of the Old Republic and gambling. Like, I would have more money than I would ever need because I got really, really good at it.
Yup. Oh yeah, especially late game when you found like all the best cards. Yep. You could spend a lot of time. Well, the real cheaty way to do it would be to save your game right before you play. And then if you lost all your credits, you would just go back and then play the game again.
Yeah, no comment on that.
That is definitely how I did swoop racing in Knights of the Old Republic. I would
That's
save my game.
Basically how I did everything in Knights of the Old Republic. Right. I see a bad guy up ahead. Let me save.
Scum saving was very real in that game. It makes me realize why video games came up with the checkpoint system in newer things.
Well, we've kind of talked about a lot of different stuff here. There's a couple people hanging out in the chat. Any of you have questions about anything? Anything you want us to talk about while we still got a little bit here?
I see Bare Naked Gaming, who's a new up-and-coming streamer you should all check out, and not just because I named his channel. He's talking about a KOTOR movie. I know a lot of people really want a KOTOR movie. Like I said, it might be this new film series. There is a Star Wars TV show in the works, a live-action Star Wars TV show that's going to be on Disney Netflix. Disney starting its own streaming service, and it's going to be an exclusive on there that has the potential for Knights of the Old Republic. Jango, how likely do you think it is that they will ever try to adapt that material?
I will say two things about this. One, I think there's about a 0% chance of a direct adaptation of any of that film. Not film, but any of those books or those games. I don't think, as much as you might like that, I don't think we will see Darth Revan in anything or anything like that. But because the Old Republic universe is so big and it's such a long period of time, I think there are plenty of opportunities to say we're going to have a film that's set 1,000 years before A New Hope. Like, I don't think, like, I can see that happening. I can't see them saying, you know, let's take, I can pull stuff off my shelves too. Let's take Knights of the Old Republic and let's make a movie out of a video game. Or let's take the Old Republic novels or the Revan novel or anything like that, and let's make a movie about, you know, the Jedi exile or something like that. You know, I don't see that happening. I mean, it could even be close to it. Like, I can see it being closely related. Like, I can see maybe even a film about the Sith Triumvirate or something like that. That's like Knights of the Old Republic adjacent. But I don't think we're going to see a different a direct adaptation of any of that material.
And I would agree with that completely. I think if we're going to continue on with these movies, we're definitely going to see movies that will eventually be prequels. In terms of Knights of the Old Republic, I feel like my thoughts on Revan in a movie are exactly what you were describing about nostalgia. Like, you would complain and grumble about nostalgia, and then the lights go down and the movie starts. I feel like I have such a fangirlness for Revan. Right now, objectively, I don't want to see him adapted, because the beauty of Revan was, spoiler alert if you haven't played the game, but it's really old, so you should have by now. The beauty of Revan is that you're Revan. So Revan is always who you want him or her to be, even though he was Legends canonically male. And to adapt Revan and kind of pin down who Revan was in a movie, I wouldn't like until the screen comes up and I start watching the movie, and then I would totally freak out. But that's really where my Kylo Ren obsession, you can kind of see my Kylo shrine here, comes from, is he looks like Darth Revan, kind of. So it's my way of kind of getting Revan on the big screen without having Revan on the big screen. But yeah, I think you're right that it would be kind of same time period. I think there's a lot of stuff in Knights of the Old Republic that would be highly problematic for Star Wars canon. It's really easy to say that characters like Revan or Nihilus were almost more powerful than Anakin Skywalker and as Vader, and I don't want that. I don't think that should be a thing. So that's kind of my worry about kind of diving into what we've seen so far from that series.
Well, a couple things really quick. One, I thought your obsession was just with Cheez-Its. I didn't realize it was a Kylo Ren.
If you're a fan, put hashtag Cheez-Its box in the chat. Let me know if you're part of the Cheez-Its team.
But the other thing I was going to say is, I think there are other things, though, that you could make a film about. Like, we've already seen Darth Bane in canon material. And so even if there are things that are problematic, I think there are ways that you can tie it in. Like, all the Darth Bane novels. I have some of those right here. I've got Dynasty of Evil right behind me, and I've got some others. But like, that would be a good adaptation. Mm-hmm. I think there are ways that you could make it happen without having to be reliant too much. And again, I feel like no Knights of the Old Republic film, no film about Revan is going to meet people's expectations, and I think that's the main reason not to do it. Is it's going to be a disappointment inherently. So I think you can set that up. I mean, I think there's still room. So the Plagueis novel isn't canon anymore, and so I think we could, I wouldn't mind seeing a Plagueis movie that looks at young Sheev Palpatine or something like that, or either there are any number of things that I would enjoy seeing, and I personally don't feel tied down to any particular part of the Legends canon or any particular part of the Star Wars universe. But what I would like to see, if they were to do a Knights of the Old Republic type thing, is to look at the Rakata Empire. Is that how you said that?
Yeah. Rakata. Rakatan. Well, it's like they were pronounced Rakata, but then their empire was the Rakatan. It was weird.
Yeah, whatever that is, I would love to see like that part of the universe explored. Some of these things that we don't know a lot about.
And then last question in the chat, and then we'll go because we've been talking a lot longer than we usually would like to. Bear's also asking if the age-old question, do we think if Qui-Gon trained Anakin, would anything have been any different?
So there are two ways to take this. One, we talk about how George Lucas is all set on like these mythical things, and Anakin's story is meant to be the story of Oedipus. I don't know if you're familiar with Oedipus from Greek mythology and Greek tragedies, but Oedipus, I don't want to spoil the thousands-year-old story of Oedipus for you if you've never experienced that, but Oedipus is basically a story about fate. Oedipus learns a prophecy about him, or his parents learn a prophecy about Oedipus, and they try to avoid that prophecy, but their avoiding that prophecy makes them fulfill the prophecy. That's Oedipus. And Anakin is not that different. Like once we attach Anakin to this prophecy, the whole rest of it becomes about the fulfillment of the prophecy. And that's problematic for a lot of different reasons, but I feel like Anakin was always fated to end up in a certain place, and how he might have gotten there would have been different. I think it might have even happened sooner if he'd studied under Qui-Gon Jinn, because Qui-Gon was closer to being rogue. There's all this gray Jedi nonsense online these days. We're getting dislikes right as I'm saying this, I'm sure. But Qui-Gon is a lot more morally ambiguous than Obi-Wan was. He's a lot more ambiguous in terms of the rules and the dogma of the Jedi Order. And so was Count Dooku. And I can see Anakin taking a different road to becoming a Sith, but still becoming a Sith. And still ending up balancing the Force, which Anakin did and Luke didn't. Let's throw that out there too. But I feel like Anakin's story was always going to be ending up in the same place, even if it got there a different way.
I think the way I've always looked at it is that if you believe that Anakin was inherently fated to fall to the dark side, destroy the Jedi, and then ultimately destroy the Sith, which is a very large question, the best way I can answer it is what Jango said, which is that's what George Lucas intended. If you want to look at it that way, I think it's fair to say, yes, it would have been different if Anakin would have been trained by Qui-Gon, and that maybe Anakin wouldn't have fallen to the dark side. And that's the reason why Qui-Gon had to die. Like, that the Force knew that Qui-Gon was the only person who could save Anakin and therefore condemn the galaxy. Therefore, Qui-Gon had to die. And I think that's another way to read it, too, that there's all these other machinations that the Force... If you want to believe that the Force kind of has a more active role in who lives and dies for this plan, I think that's one way to read it. But I think that's also kind of putting the Force into the position of a god, which is what a lot of us are kind of more, especially Western people, are more inclined to do, because Western religion is usually centered around a god figure as opposed to like an energy force type figure. So I think absolutely the way Jango explained it is very true, in that I think I think it's a very real thing that people dig their own graves and people end up inevitably causing their own worst problems. And I think Anakin would have had these issues no matter what. I think he would have left the Jedi no matter what under Qui-Gon. I don't think Qui-Gon would have forced him to stay a Jedi. I think he just wanted Anakin to learn the Force and didn't want him to stay a slave. But I think it's hard to say. But for me, I guess I always have a hard time with this question because it's hard to say because it wasn't ever meant to be.
Right. And I think what we learn about Anakin and what we learn about the Force from the Mortis trilogy and the Clone Wars goes a long way to answering this question too. You know, when we think about Anakin and fate and the Force and things like that. But.
All right. So I think that's what we have in the comments right now. Thanks to Nolan and Bear for sticking around and talking to us. That's really great. We love talking to people. But we're probably going to cut it here because we want to keep it short enough for people who aren't around right now to still be able to get caught up, kind of try to keep this around podcast length. But yeah, we will be back here next week on Thursday. We're trying to keep it around the same time, so probably around the same time, but it might shift an hour or so one way or the other, depending on life, until we can get this a little bit more nailed down. But that's what I have to say for now. Jango, have anything else before we go?
Yeah, just really quick, I want you to make sure that you are following us on Twitter, that you can like us on Facebook if you have one of those. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/the Star Wars Refuge, to make sure you get notifications every time we start, so that you don't show up right as we're getting done. You can get that notification. It'll pop up and say, hey, we're doing a stream. Also, again, we're going to get more solo content out. We're going to be talking about Rebels. Rebels is coming back really soon. It'll be all those things starting back. We still got a Let's Play series going. YodaBauer is still doing her video diaries. All the things are still happening, and make sure you're plugged in to all the different outlets that Port Haven has, so that we can be your Star Wars refuge.
Oh, and quick shout out, I put them in the description, but we are running this super low budget through Google Hangouts Live. Our goal is to eventually live stream this like other people. And we've been working through a lot of technical problems, and 2 channels have been really great at helping us, which is The Couch Bum and Great Canadian Guy, and links to their channel are in the description. So we want to say a big thank you. Hopefully we'll get to do this like the big kids eventually. But yeah, until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Yay!
Ooh.